There we go. All right. Welcome, everybody. It's good to have Engage back engaged. And we had a good crew yesterday. I think we had about 7 or 8 guys on yesterday morning. So it was a good turnout. And I'm just going to pray, and then we'll jump into some of the thoughts that I had in relationship to the mission. And so bow with me, if you will. We'll pray and then jump right in. Well, Father, thanks for the opportunity just to rub shoulders with these men whom I respect. I pray you continue to encourage our hearts to the power of your Spirit in us and in our churches, that you would allow him free reign in our own hearts and continue to challenge our thinking about the mission of Christ and the gospel and how that is to impact not only our lives, but also our communities. Father, we're understand our own struggles in the world that we live in, and it's a difficult context for us to navigate in the best of seasons, and yet now we have a particular challenge, but a great opportunity to rely on you and to live by faith. And so I pray that as we even share on these things, it would stir our hearts to the opportunities we have in our own context. I thank you for our time and entrust it to you in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so I sold Engage this month on the idea of the kind of the one stumbling block for the gospel, and why is the mission sometimes not getting done? And as I told the crew yesterday, I said, you're probably going to be disappointed in my answer, so to speak, but I've been challenged by this and continue to be, especially as I step into the new year. There's adjustments I'm making even in my own missional engagement that because of this kind of thinking that I've been going through and so on and so forth. So I want to tell you a story. I had a friend of mine when I was in Portland, and I don't know if I've told it in this forum before, but he was a really interesting guy. He had a very interesting concept of, let's say, called serving and obedience. I called him up. Lord, I was praying for him. Lord put him on my heart, so I invited him to go for lunch, and we sat down and we chatted for a little bit. And then he says, "So why did you want to meet?" And it was kind of interesting because I said, "Well, I was praying for you and I was thinking about you, and the Spirit just sort of prompted me, and I thought it'd be fun to get together and talk about a few things." And his response kind of surprised me. He said, "So the Spirit prompted you to do it. So you didn't actually want to get together with me. God had to tell you to do it." And I went, "What?" I said, "What does that mean?" And it was kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I had since then learned that he has a very interesting sort of theological framework, and that is, if you have to be told to do something, then you're not doing it out of love. In other words, you shouldn't have to be told to do it if you really love somebody. So I suspect as I talked to him, it was like he looked at it as a marriage, that if a husband really knows his wife really well, he'll anticipate whatever needs she has, and without having to be asked or told, will just do it. But if you have to be asked and told, then your action isn't authentic because you're only doing it because you have to. Well, I'll admit I took issue with that, and it even came down to a men's retreat where I made the comment to say, well, I don't think I could in good conscience advocate anybody living their life apart from the leading of the Spirit of God and operating according to God's truth, as God tells us how we're supposed to live. And I think a proper faith response is obedience. And so as we started thinking through that, we had a bit of a disconnect, because his perspective of this whole idea that if you had to be told to do it and you did it only when you were told to do it, then it was disingenuous. It really wasn't an act of love. You know, as I began to think about that, I guess the answer to the question is, what's one of the biggest stumbling blocks to the gospel and the mission not getting done, is I'll phrase it this way. It's the simplicity of obedience. The reason I mention that, and I want to walk you through a text today that kind of, I think, tries to challenge my thinking, and hopefully yours a little bit, is that I don't think obedience is an inauthentic way to live life. When God's word tells us to do things, in fact, Jesus said this to his disciples, you love me if you do what I command you to do. And so it's really kind of a weird thing, but I think we live in a culture, and I know this because of some discipling experiences with some younger guys in our church, that anything that isn't organic, anything that doesn't come from just sort of an intuitive sense of, I feel like doing this and I should do it, often is treated as inauthentic. I've tried to do Bible studies with guys who are younger, and they last like 1 week doing a Bible study, and they just won't do it because they think the idea of filling in answers in a workbook or exploring truth that way is kind of a fake way to deal with truth. For some reason, people are saying, if I don't come to the reality of this just in my own personal mind and heart and experience, then all this other stuff is artificial. I had one gentleman tell me that he's even concerned about sending his kids to a Christian camp because he says, well, that's a fake environment. It's kind of a hyper energized spiritual environment for a week, and it's not real. And so when they make decisions there that don't translate into real life when they get back. And so he was even considering the possibility that sending his kids to a Christian camp wasn't authentic. It wasn't genuine. It wasn't real. It was artificial. And I want to say just along those lines that I think we're dealing in an environment where unless people almost come to their own sense of intuitive realization of what they need to do, that most things around it feel like a duty and an obligation and obedience that's inauthentic and not real. And I want to suggest to you that the passage I want you to look at here with me a little bit is that sometimes simple obedience to make disciples often gets overwhelmed by a lot of other demands and expectations that are put on our life, and we never get around to it. Just the simple obedience of wanting to make disciples, because our lives are overwhelmingly cluttered with a whole bunch of duties and other things that we get into. So let me explain that. If you've got your Bibles or on your phones or whatever, I'm going to read out of Luke 6. And I want to read about Jesus' experience with the Pharisees. And I actually did, in part, my dissertation out of Dallas Seminary out of Luke 6. I actually reframed a doctrinal dissertation by Bruce Ewing out of Oklahoma. And he built his whole framework around Luke 6 and the idea of discipleship for leadership. And what does that look like? Now, we're not going to dive into obviously all that, but I want to take a minute to look at this passage. And I'm going to read probably the first 11 verses quickly, and then we'll try to frame some of this. Now, it came about on the certain Sabbath that Jesus was passing through the grain fields, and his disciples were picking and eating the heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, why do you do that? Or why do you do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And Jesus answered them and said, have you not even read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and took and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for any to eat except the priests alone, and he gave it to his companions. And he, Jesus, was saying to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And it came about on another Sabbath that he entered the synagogue and was teaching there. And there was a man whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he healed on the Sabbath, in order that they might find a reason to accuse him. But he knew that what they were thinking, and he said to the man with the withered hand, rise and come forward. And he rose and came forward. And Jesus said to them, being the Pharisees, I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to destroy it? And after looking around at them all, he said to them, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they themselves were filled with rage and discussed together what they might do to Jesus. Of course, if you know the narrative, it goes on to talk about Jesus spending all night in prayer and then handpicking his 12 disciples so that he could begin to really invest and train them for the mission that Christ was on. And I think when I get down to this idea of simple obedience, I think a lot of times we've taught our people to think about, regurgitate, discuss, and talk about truth, but never obey it. I mean, you know the dilemma in small groups, right? You talk about a truth, here's a practical application, and then everyone comes back next week and they go, oh yeah, I kind of forgot all about that. I didn't do anything. And so then what we do is we go on to the next lesson and try to bring up an application, and everyone walks away and comes back the next week and it's like, oh, didn't do that either. And it's almost like we've taught our people that it's okay not to obey truth. Not that that's our fault, but that's kind of the culture that we're in. I remember, I love Jesus' statement in Matthew 7, where he says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them is like a man who builds his house on the rocks. He follows it with, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And my concern in a lot of this is just the simplicity of obedience to the mission and how much clutter gets in the way from us doing that. It might be our own expectations, it might be the expectations of others, but I want you to notice in this particular text in Luke 6, the first 5 verses, there's a huge contrast between what the Pharisees want to do doesn't involve character or any kinds of intrinsic spiritual conviction, but simply a legalistic methodology. All they're concerned about is the rules. Now, the reason I mention that is because I don't care how good your church is, there's oftentimes that the rules and regulations, the policies and the traditions of a church can be the biggest obstacle to simple obedience to the mission of making disciples. I've seen this in my own experience. I've seen it in talking to other pastors that, you know, we have to have constitutions and bylaws and policies, and we do that for clarity in terms of not having to reinvent the wheel every time we turn around. But I think it's intriguing that when Jesus goes to really launch his ministry, there isn't a single program, a single ministry that would support his efforts. He's not getting any support from the existing religious structure of the time. And the Pharisees aren't going to add any weight to what he's doing. I mean, they're looking at every corner to try to hammer him and accuse him of doing what's wrong. And what Jesus does isn't super miraculous, but it's profoundly ticks the guys off because he's breaking the rules. When you get into verses 6 through 11, it's interesting that the scribes are deliberately, you know, the one took place out in the field. This one takes place in the synagogue, so it's kind of the sacred place. And Jesus goes in and does some teaching, and I don't know whether they put this man in here to bait Jesus, but it sure sounds like it when you read through the text that this is a setup, but it doesn't matter to Jesus. And what's intriguing here is that Jesus isn't afraid to step outside of the confines of the program to focus on people. And the Pharisees are notorious for all the rules and regulations, and frankly, they don't seem to care about people at all. And yet Jesus takes this huge risk, knowing that he's going to catch the venom of the Pharisees and the scribes over one person that he decides to heal on the Sabbath. And it's remarkable because, you know, at times it can feel like our churches are like that they're committed to traditions, they're committed to rules and regulations, and there doesn't seem to be much support for disciple making at all and the mission of what Christ wants to do. And I have talked to guys on occasion who actually sort of want to give up because they've spent so much of their life trying to change the infrastructure, to change the traditions, to change the bylaws and the policies to get something moving, that they've just literally worn themselves out trying to change the elephant in the room, and it's occupied all their time, and they literally have had no time or lost sight of the simple obedience of making disciples. And in some ways, it just starts by caring for the next person in line who's hurting. It's kind of what Jesus does. And as I begin to look through this, Jesus is really committed to this mission of the Father. And instead of trying to change all the structure of the Pharisees, Jesus literally goes around it almost. Jesus never tried to build a big program. He never tried to build some great business. Jesus simply, in one sense, almost ignored the existing structures, and he committed to going away, as it were, and finding 12 guys that he could build into, that he could build his heart and his vision and his values into them, that in a sense bypass the structure. And I look back on my ministry, and sometimes I felt as the senior pastor, as the lead pastor, my obligation was to the whole structure. And I've had times in my ministry where I've spent enormous amounts of time trying to convince people to change the way we do things, and in sense, at times abandon even the simple obedience of trying to find some people that I could simply build into and share my heart and values with them and raise them up, not in spite of the structure, but alongside of it, and to empower them to go around and impact the next person who has the withered hand. Hello, Wesley, good to have you. We're in Luke 6. I'm trying to just frame some things in terms of just obedience to the mission of Christ. So as I talk to pastors, I think one of the biggest frustrations is the church won't change, tradition won't change, the bylaws won't change. And I've tried to encourage some guys to say, maybe we should imitate Jesus a little bit. And while I'm certainly in favor of us trying to speak into our church environments and our leadership to say, we need to make changes in relationship to the way we do things and our bylaws and our policies and so on and so forth, Jesus says, okay, well, even if that doesn't change, I can still carry out the Father's mission. I can still make disciples because I'm not dependent on the structure in order to do it. And my encouragement to some guys who I've run into on occasion who've been really discouraged, like he says, I don't know what to do because no one here will change. The question I said is there anybody either in the church or outside of the church that you can move alongside and start healing their withered hand, or to start investing in them and caring for them and continuing the mission, even if the infrastructure won't change? Because then we can have fruitful ministry without getting our life and our heart crushed by trying to change everyone and everything to get to the goal of doing the mission of Christ. And so it raises some, when Jesus does this, this whole section in Luke 6 is a fascinating lesson on how Jesus, as I would call it in some of my own life, wasted too much time trying to change the system rather than finding people that I can build into and raise up disciples. Now that's a precarious perch. I get it. I've done pastoring for over 30 years, and you don't want to do things in spite of people or to push it in people's face. So there's the bigger responsibility of shepherding and preaching and those kinds of things. But I've seen too many guys even drop out of ministry because it won't move. And my encouragement is find a few people that you can build into, just like Jesus did, and raise up individuals who will carry on the mission beyond simply the boundaries of where the infrastructure is right now. One of the reasons, and I've felt this, if you flip over to verses 39 and 40, Jesus tells this parable that's ingrained within Luke 6, and it's ingrained in the element of what's going on. But it's it's right at the heart of the mission. And I think it's right at the heart of disciple making, where he says, and Jesus spoke a parable to them. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone after he's been fully trained will be like his teacher. You know, I've raised this issue up in my own church kind of thing about even the idea of church planting or getting beyond our walls. And the guys have caught that vision a little bit. And then all of a sudden they realize that, well, one of the problems is we're not doing enough what we would call leadership development. We're not raising up new people to run programs or ministries. And I went, well, I get that. But if we don't have any activity where we're investing in people and raising up first disciple makers, individuals who have the heart and vision of Christ to make disciples, regardless if the programs are being successful or not, then we're going to lose at some point, because then we're going to have the same programs, the same leaders, and the same situation 10 years down the road. And I haven't been able to get it to change or move. But if there's no investment in individuals who want to grow, then you've got no leaders at all for anything. I talked to one church here within the last 6 months, and in fact, I've talked to 2 or 3. There's been no, by their own admission, not my accusation, they've said, we haven't been doing any kind of leadership development at all for the last 15, 20 years. In other words, they found people to fit spots on programs and boards and ministries and programs, but they haven't been developing people as fully blown disciples. I mean, the greatest blessing of COVID, if there is such a thing, is that when it started wiping out all our programs, we all looked around and went, wait a minute, how do we do ministry if you don't have programs? And to me, it comes back to give them a call. It's relationships. And I think what Jesus demonstrates is that we never have to feel like we've run aground in our ministry, or that I've wasted my time because the big church infrastructure or all the programs or the bylaws and the policies, I can't get it to change. I can almost, and you have to take this with a grain of salt, I can almost leave that to itself, as long as I can find 2 or 3 or 4, you may not be able to find 12 like Jesus did, but if I can start investing in a few people and they can catch the same heart as me, we can see people come to Christ. We can disciple them in our homes. We can meet with them in the coffee shop. We can do all kinds of fruitful ministry without having to feel like we failed because we can't change the big giant monster infrastructure that's buried in tradition, in rules and regulations, like the Pharisees, who, to be honest, had wanted nothing to do with Jesus and changing and transforming lives. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that a lot of churches are pharisaical, although we could probably make a case for it. But I also want us as pastors to sort of say, there's still really hope for meaningful ministry, even if I can't get the church to change. But it starts with me finding some people that I can just invest in. And I feel like I have to learn to model that. I'm even making adjustments this year to make one of my priorities about building into people, not that are on official elders or deacons, but people who are actually want to invest in other people and see life change. And as I build into them, then they can build into other people. It doesn't matter whether they're on a board or running a program or serving in a ministry. Most of them are. But they're also making time outside of those things to sit down with someone and say, listen, how's your life going? What struggles are you having? And that journey on life-to-life relationships is making all the difference in the world in our context, because people are just totally overwhelmed with the clutter and the chaos and the uncertainty of the stuff going on in our world. I mean, I think people are starving for relationships, and we need it as much as they do. The biggest encouragement I get is when I get to hang out in the coffee shop and I hear someone's story and they tell me they're praying for me and they appreciate the fact that I'd make time for them. And so I just don't want to be a blind guide. And I've felt at times my own sense of failure when I can't get everybody going in the same direction sometimes. So part of me, I've done this, and then I'll leave it open for some interactions. I've kind of changed my mindset a little bit on how I define my own role in ministry. I used to say I'm a pastor teacher and I love preaching on Sunday mornings. But I also know that as much as people compliment me on it, I don't always hear a lot of life change from people on Sunday mornings. They'll say, hey, nice message. I'll never forget the old guy when I was first in my first pastorate in a village out in central Alberta. We had people share testimonies and they all went horrendously longer than they should have. And I had 5 minutes at the end of the service to preach. So I said, we're not going to do that this morning. So I dismissed it. And at the back, one of the older gentlemen said, that was a great message you did this morning, Pastor. I'm kind of like, you do know I didn't preach. He goes, oh yeah, right. Oh, I'm sorry. So as much as I love preaching and teaching, oftentimes I'll define myself as my first priority in ministry is to be a disciple maker. My second responsibility is to be preaching and teaching on Sunday mornings. And not everybody needs to think that way, but for me, it helps me sink into a lifelong journey of mission and ministry, because someday I'm going to get old enough where they're going to look at me and go, yeah, Brad, we love you, but you're repeating yourself 6 times. You've gone on 4 scenic byways in your message, and we have no idea what you're talking about anyway. We would really appreciate if you step down from this formal preaching and teaching stuff, but it doesn't mean I can't hang out with individuals and encourage them in their journey and pray for them. I can do that for the rest of my life. And so I keep thinking of myself, I want to be a disciple maker first and foremost, because I think it imitates what Christ did. My gift is to preach and teach, and I get the real cool privilege to do that for people. But I'm not staking my whole sense of value and worth on preaching and teaching. The greatest rewards I get is investing in individuals and at times seeing them come to Christ and then beginning to build into them so that they can become a spiritual parent someday. Now, it's kind of the slow boat to the end of the river, but I think it could at times be the most fruitful. Because all I need to do is, if I can impact 3 people who have the same heart, then it starts to multiply. And that becomes sort of the hope at the end of the tunnel. And I think it could be, it's that simple obedience to the mission of making disciples that I'm trying to even recapture in my own ministry in fresh new ways this year. So let me pause. We always want to give this open to discussion. You can agree or disagree, give some thoughts, perspective, like it, don't like it, think it's challenging, whatever kind of rings your bell. But I'd love to hear your input and thinking about some of the things we're talking about. So floor is open. Jump in wherever you want to. If you can stay, that'd be great.
I was just thinking, Brad, about a guy that I was introduced online who he introduced himself as he was formerly the pastor of one of the largest churches in Michigan, but he had stepped away from that and he didn't really feel that it was that effective. And he was now in a ministry called Big Life. And so he was doing Big Life training, which really, I guess, as I process some of that I participated in some of that, it was all about getting her out of the structure and freeing people to serve and to do and to act. But, their thing was, you can't do it in the church. You have to create these little house churches and give everybody freedom to act and to do, and here's their gospel presentation and grow these little mini churches everywhere. I just thought it was, I don't know, kind of interesting to me that I just put it together with what you were saying.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting challenge, Alan. I'm not trying to, I'm in the church, so I'm not trying to throw it on, the baby out with the bathwater, because I think there's some healthy environments that are doing some good things. But it's kind of along the same adage of people thinking that the Christian life is about coming to church and showing up and helping in a program each week. And that misses the whole picture of the mission. And so in that sense, I would agree very much with you, is that, it's like, and I can't remember if I've told you guys this, we just got brand new chairs for our auditorium and pulled the fuse out this week. So I'm kind of in a little happy zone for no particular reason over the little thing I've been asking for 12 and a half years. But the one thing that I've been doing since the day I got here is I won't allow anyone to call that the sanctuary. That's, and some of Dave's heard me go on about this. And the reason for it is because I think the New Testament says our lives are the temple and the sanctuary of the Spirit of the living God. We're the church, not this room around the corner of my office. And I wouldn't make a big fuss about it, but I think there's a whole value system that people have in our culture that says, hey, if I show up on Sunday and I help with, one on Wednesday night, everything's good. And I'm kind of like, well, no, wait a minute. Church is not an activity where we come and visit Jesus in the ICU ward on Sunday mornings to see if he's okay, and then we go off and do our own thing. We're to embody the presence and the power of the Spirit of God, and we're to be the church in the world. And so I think part of it is I want to try to create an environment, regardless of the clutter, where we're trying to empower people to realize they're the church. It isn't this thing that we come to every week. So I think I like the line of thinking. I just don't want to get to the point where we're going to throw the church, out the window, because I think that's embodied mostly in people, not the structures. So I won't even let them call it the sanctuary. If someone does that, I stick a plastic fork in them. I say, this is the auditorium. This is where we meet. You're the church. So I would agree with you on that one, I think. Okay, makes sense. Other thoughts? I mean, does any of that make sense?
Yeah, we often use a phrase that, you don't go to church, you are the church. So even just changing some of that language just a bit is you don't go to church. Like you don't go to you are the assembly, you are the body of Jesus. And so just even reiterating, same thing, like we don't call it the sanctuary. This isn't the house of God. Like we are the house of God. Your body is the temple of the living God. And so being able to even couch, some of that back to just the thought on discipleship is we've, especially as industrialized, production oriented Western Americans, we make even church and discipleship a commodity. Where it's so much has to be unlearned, especially in historic churches or people that have been around American church a long time. You have to almost unteach a lot of bad habits and a lot of, quite frankly, bad theology, in the sense of like even discipleship. People get crippled because they only know discipleship as a program.
Right.
Rather than a life of following Jesus and obeying him. Yeah. Right. Like, and being, and so like, it's man, you run into, at least I run into so much of just like I call it fundamentalism, Holy Trinity is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Scriptures, that if I can point to a verse or if I can do a task, it doesn't matter how I treat someone else. Through my Monday through Saturday, like Brad was saying, it's if I do a one on Wednesday night and I show up on church on Sunday, I'm good to go. And so it just doesn't affect every aspect and call into every realm of our lives under the lordship of Jesus. And so this discipleship is like this program rather than a life lived and a life followed of obedience and faith. And so just even kind of walking back some of that kind of sort of stuff is they don't even know how to walk alongside people because it's not a program.
Yeah, Wesley, pardon me I don't know quite when you popped in, so I can't remember what you heard and didn't hear. I was doing Luke 6, 1-11.
Yeah.
And, first thing Jesus does, both those activities are on the Sabbath, and he ticks the Pharisees off completely because he's not keeping the rules of the Sabbath. And his statement is, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, not the rules. And then he heals the man with a withered hand, of course, and they're really ticked at him because he won't do it. And sometimes to go to your point, I think sometimes our traditions and our institutions can feel that stuck because, we've got these rules and regulations. You can only sing whatever kind of song, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we get into these massive struggles over rules and regulations. And, unfortunately, the only, Jesus didn't do much to change it, but he says, I'm going to create a new paradigm. And he didn't need their permission to do it. He's still, and so it's really a lot of what you were saying, I think. I mean, I think you've hit a lot of thoughts right on the head, better than even what I said. I think we have to get people, especially in this world, just understanding the power of the personal presence of Christ and living that out all week long kind of thing. And unteaching things is hard.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus is coming in a culture where they haven't heard from the heavens in 400 years, right? Like they haven't heard from the Lord in a long time.
Right.
And so they're entrenched in, we're right. We're absolutely right. And we can proof text you until the day is long. And so I feel like so many of our Christians are the same way, is we've rested on the laurels of a Christian country and a Christian nation and a Christian, this America. And yet, man, you press down, it's like all these Christians, like the Pharisees, they didn't know anybody that wasn't a Pharisee.
Right.
And you have Christians that don't even know not yet believing people yet.
Right.
And it's like, how can you pray and evangelize and reach people if we're so concerned about the moral majority or like holding on to what? Like,
right.
And so, just really encouraging people to let the Spirit of God be your witness and your life and your testimony and your life blood. And Micah 6:8, right? Just do that.
Right. And I think it's easy to get I think it's very easy for us to get discouraged on it. And Jesus starts by just healing one guy in the synagogue. That's it. One life. And he modeled it. And what I have to learn is I've got some better models around me doing this than I am. And so that's the strength of the body, is I can learn from them. But started with one hymn, and then he prayed, and then he picked just 12 guys. And even one of those turned into a bit of a flunky. But just the emphasis on it comes back to people and relationships is really a powerful statement that I think Jesus does here. And I find this even when I'm talking to churches, when there's more chatter about the rules and regulations and how things operate inside, it's almost never healthy. Most of the I know we're not supposed to gossip, but when the conversation's about, hey, I talked to my friend down the street, here's my neighbor, here's the person I work, that sounds way healthier than, why are we singing these songs and why are we, all this stuff. It's once you feel it, it just starts getting exacerbated, because when people start having those conversations, kind of like, got to pull my hair out or something, or, because it just seems to miss the mark of everything that we're doing. But I think there's hope. Even as Jesus modeled it one person at a time, I think we have permission from God to do that without cracking our head wide open trying to change the system. We're probably going to get some flack for it, but if I'm speaking from a human perspective, Jesus got 12 guys around him that had the same heartbeat, so he had a little insulation that he's not alone in the journey, kind of thing. So, but anyway, really good thoughts, Wes. I really appreciate it. Those hit it right on the head, I think. So anybody else? We got a lot of time. We got 15 minutes, but so I appreciate the thoughts, but feel free to come and go when you need to. We're just
well, I think, Brad, on the obedience part and how people just come to church and feel like, okay, we check in and then we do our thing and we go out, and without the transformation, I kind of put the parallel to, since I'm on the ambulance in the fire department, being on there and being on call pretty much all the time, it really impacts my life in how I park, where I sit, so that I'm able to respond And I know that there's other guys in the department, they don't turn the pagers on, they all different things, but if we think of our Christianity like that, it is going to impact where we, are we accessible to people? Are we able to get out? Are we free? Can we drop something? Can we? And I think that's an important, kind of a perspective for people. And again, the longer people have had in church, as Alan mentioned there about, the Pharisees had 400 years to perfect their craft. It's we do have to take some time to help people understand different, the key things. Not that the other things are unimportant. There's a great movement for house churches, and that seems to be a hot topic. But when you look at the scriptures, there's still some oversight, some shepherding, some group of leaders to work together. So I think that's an important part that we have to keep both of those in mind. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I love your illustration. That's cool. I hadn't thought of it like that. Just always being on call and always having to think about being ready to respond at a moment. I like that. That's kind of cool. So, yeah, good. Other thoughts? Dan, you still with us?
Still with you.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things I've, running into churches, and this is one of the things that I've run into recently with several different churches, and that is, we might call it leadership development. To me, it's like disciple making. They admittedly, both of them said, we've never done any kind of leadership development. To me, I just look at it as there hasn't been any, they've run programs and had activities and events, but they're not investing in anybody in their sense of spiritual growth and maturity and real life change. Because ultimately, to pick up on your comments, Dave, doesn't really matter whether it's a mega church or house church or micro church or what. I mean, what we're trying to do is empower people to live out God's presence in the world. Right. And the methodology, structures can hinder it. I think there's a lot of churches that have structures that are just killing the process. So, I think those need to be fixed. But that's why it comes down to people. It's like, I have one couple that I've been discipling for 5 years. They came to me with a huge crisis in their marriage. So the first year was triage. The second year was reconciliation. The third year, was growth, both together. And now they're discipling another couple. Now, it may not be, it's not going to get written up. It's not like I've changed the whole world. But somehow in this journey, I told them, I said, I want to do this so that you'll start investing in others. I'm not making this investment just to be busy. And they're doing it. They're investing in another couple. And, those are some of the greatest changes I've seen, is not from preaching, not from how big our program, it's that one-on-one real investment thing. And when people catch that heart of Christ, it just, everything changes for them. And I think he can still do it. I'm counting on it. I still want to do this ministry for for a while. So I don't want to, but it can be discouraging. I know a couple of guys are stepping out of ministry because they've just kind of got beat up by the internal system so badly that it's like, why do I want to do this anymore? So Luke 6, I think, is a great paradigm to give us some encouragement that we can still do this. We can still get there. Might not be what we imagined. And sometimes our own adjustments need to be pretty big. Especially with guys coming out of college and seminary, they fill their heads with go change the world. And then they go and get their teeth kicked out. And then it's not like, what did I sign up for again? This doesn't seem like it. So I think Jesus gives us some great hope that we can still make a profound difference. So good. Any other thoughts? I won't keep you here just to make the hour up, but I love hearing your thoughts. It's real insightful.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about how to expand people's vision that if they really love the Lord, but they're so entrenched in patterns that when something disrupts the pattern, it then there's a problem that has to be fixed because this is wrong, as opposed to maybe a ministry opportunity. Just for the example, the neighborhood kids that we've been dealing with that do not function within our structures. They're just, too wild, too out of control. I go outside, I talk to them in the parking lot, and they climb up the poles of the church, grab the gutters, and pull themselves onto the roof. And that gives, people at our church heart attacks. And, I encourage them not to do it, but people are putting up walls, and because these kids don't know what boundaries are, they're more concerned about setting the solid boundaries than they are about the soul. I believe in boundaries. So I'm just thinking about how to help expand their vision.
Well, any thoughts, guys? What do you think? Tune from heaven.
I think in some of our experience, it's been about a couple of things: modeling and invitation. And so it's less about avoid these things and stop doing these things. And it's more about, hey, come along with us on what we sense the Spirit leading us to love and care for people that are really difficult and hard to love, that don't look anything like us, that don't have the same values, that don't have boundaries. And so, for some of us, it's just been being able to just ask for the Spirit for, relational creativity. And maybe it's bringing the hot Cheetos that the kids like, and sitting out there in the parking lot with a Gatorade and a bag of their favorite chips, and just finding out a bit about their home life. Maybe it's stepping in and seeing if any of them need help with homework and after school, and providing a place where they're already at, and reaching out to some of their folks and getting some of your church members to come along. Like, man, give me an hour of your time, and let's open up the gym. And so that they can throw balls and run around and have scooters and that sort of thing, and maybe in a bit more environment that's a bit safer. I don't know, whatever that it is. It's just being able to, instead of, at least in my experience, just you got to stop doing this. It won't work. Doesn't work very well, rather than an invitation. And quite frankly, like at the end of the day, too, if I'm honest, not many people take you up on it. They're just, it's only going to be a few that catch the vision for really what it could be, and are, if they're honest with themselves, really truly do love unlovable people. And so, I've had a lot of people, even after the invitation, walk away because, I had a board member tell me he doesn't get involved in the lives of people because it's just too messy. I'm like, well, at least you're honest. Like, we can at least start there, that you're not willing to get involved in people's lives. So we can at least have a starting point. And that's just, I think, at the end of the day, this guy's retired, sold his company for multi-millions. Like, he's got all the time in the world. He's in the best possible place to do incredible ministry, and yet he doesn't want to get messy. And so, it even after a warm invitation and a gospel message, even religious people won't always take you up on it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But the few that do, they will, like Brad said, they'll take you, they'll take you for the long haul, and there'll be that insulation, and that group, that your tribe, that you'll watch God do incredible things through.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jesus ended up doing things outside of the structure. And so I think that's what it's going to take for us to touch those kinds of people is, the Bible studies over in their house, not over here. And Alan, I think, we've talked enough. I think you're trying to do those kind of things. I think the gap might be a little bit is you've given invitations to others to try to join you and they haven't done it yet, but I think Jesus could not do what he was doing in the Pharisee structure. It just wouldn't work. It wasn't going to happen. So I like what Wesley said. I mean, fully supported. I think it's a great insight.
Yep.
Mhm.
So.
Good.
Yeah, good. Any other thoughts? Thanks, Wes. Loved your input. It's great. So. Dan, you got any thoughts?
I was just thinking that, one of the reasons that Christ was never going to go along with the Pharisees was what he had said before. He only does and only says what his Father tells him to say. That was the agenda, not the stuff that might have already been there ahead of him. So, he was going to be outside the box because it wasn't their box he was focused on.
Right. Yeah, sometimes we want to be accepted, so we try to fit into their box and then get them to do something different. That doesn't work very well. I want to give you one reason. I put it in the chat, so I don't know if you open that up, whether you'll see it or not, but there's a nice little book written by Justin Gravitt. It's called The Foundation of Disciple Making Culture. He's talking about how to develop a core team of disciple makers. I found it actually quite encouraging just to read it. It just gives a little different perspective on things. A lot of it, there's at least one chapter in there, Wesley, that talks about when you invite people into this process, they'll sort of say the right things, but then you can pick up on things that they say that goes, they're not really committed to this because of the way they say it. I put the link, it's at discipleship.org. And then there's okay. Let me see if I can. I did it, Tara. It depends when you came in. Maybe it's not there. Let me do this. I'll put it in here again. Let me see if this will work. Did that pop up?
Yep.
Okay, so it's called The Foundation of Disciple Making Culture. If it can be helpful to you, I encourage you to read it. It's not long and it's really simple, but I really like the way Justin kind of just tackles some of this. It feels really earthy, down to earth, and realistic about where people are at and where they're not at in terms of being involved in disciple making. So if it's worth anything, go ahead and use it. If it's helpful, great. If not, just ignore it. But it encouraged me, and I thought it might be a good, this is kind of what we're thinking about doing. How do we develop a core group of people that are committed to this? And so I commend it to you. So, well, listen, if there's any last thoughts, this is the time to throw them in. Otherwise, I want to close in prayer and just let you go and respect your time. But any final parting insights or? Okay, well, let me pray. Thanks you guys so much for coming in here. I really appreciate this. This was really different than yesterday. The other one was good, and I recorded that one. We'll probably send it out on our email the first of the month, so you can watch that one too if you want. But this one just took on a whole flavor of its own, just because you had some really different perspectives on it, and I really appreciate it. So let me pray for you, and then we'll let you go. Father, thank you for the calling you've placed on our life. I thank you for just even the reminder that Jesus didn't do anything other than what the Father called him to do, and that's what you've called us to do. And sometimes there seems to be a lot of obstacles and a lot of clutter in so many different ways. And yet I'm encouraged because Jesus never allowed that to dissuade him from the mission that he was on. And he demonstrated that in terms of modeling for his disciples, that it's not about rules and regulations. It's about people, not just keeping traditions. And he really was investing in individuals. And Father, I just pray for these guys that you would continue to give them individuals who have the right heart to really become disciple makers, and that would encourage them in terms of just your provision and your generosity to them to provide people who will engage the process, that you would break down sometimes our own stereotypes in our own minds about what it means to live a successful Christian life, and allow your Spirit to drive us in directions that we really have to rely on you. And I thank you for the efforts of these men to keep pressing the envelope and to being examples for you. And I pray you'd continue to encourage them to do so. I thank you for all of them. May your richest blessing be upon their life, in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Good, guys. Thank you for joining us. This
Thank
was
you.
great. So
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks,
yeah,
Brad.
you're welcome. Yeah, we'll catch up to you later. Thanks for being here. I'll stay on for a few minutes if somebody has anything they want to yak about. But anyway.
You
Thanks.
look really good on TV.
What's that?
I said, you look really good on TV.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Dan, for joining us. We've been kind of working at this for a while and haven't had a chance to